Hello everybody, my name is Dranos and welcome to this video where we're going to take a look at some awesome new items that have been found on the PTR in the past couple of days. So let's start off by mentioning that all of these items come with plus 25 corruption on them. If you haven't seen my previous video on corruption, 25 is a lot. I imagine that everybody's budget in Mythic rating for the amount of corruption they can have across their gear is going to be about 39 after you remove, corruption resistance. So 25 is a huge chunk of that budget. Depending on how much corruption resistance you do have. However, these items do all have very powerful abilities, and these are just going to be high item level pieces, right? They're going to be mythic weapons that you can get access to. So let's go take a look at what each of these do. For starters, we have Vor's Yokal. This is an intellect mace that gives you Void Ritual, giving your spells and abilities a chance to increase all secondary stats by 10 every second for 20 seconds. And the chance is increased if at least 2 nearby allies also have Void Ritual. So we're getting sort of a incentive to stack this item. We've seen this on things like Incandescent Sliver before, where it sort of gets better the more people in your raid have it. And I expect that this one, increasing all secondary stats by 10 every second for 20 seconds. Let's take a look at what the RPPM is on this. It is approximately 1 proc per minute just by itself. And that probably goes up maybe to 1.5 if you have 2 nearby allies that have it. So that's going to be a lot of secondary stats worth of value on this one item, right? Increasing by 10 every second for 20 seconds. So that's going to mean, an average of 110 over 20 seconds on all your secondaries? That's quite a lot, right? That's like 8 sockets worth or something, right? That's a lot of secondary stats, and secondary stats are very good for a lot of specs. So this thing looks like a really powerful thing. Although, again, 25 corruption, big cost to pay. That's a big cost to pay. That could be a lot of, crit damage if you can get all the pieces. However, this might be one of the easiest ways to, fill your corruption budget with just 1 or 2 items, is to use these weapons, because you can get almost all your corruption that you're willing to budget on one piece. So that's worth noting. Like, these weapons might be particularly good if you don't do Mythic Plus or whatever, and you don't have a lot of rolls at those crit damage pieces. And you just want to get some good value for your corruption somewhere, this might be a really good way to do that. Anyways, let's take a look at the next one here. Pharaohlos, Empire's Dream. So this is a strength one-handed sword. Your damaging abilities build stacks of searing flames. When you reach 30 stacks, exhale a searing breath, dealing damage equal to 5% of your health to all targets in front of you. All targets in front of you, so this is not split damage as the ability is right now. I suspect that some of these weapons that don't do split damage right now will end up doing split damage by the time they make it to live. This is something that looks really strong, especially on specs like Prot Warrior, because those are going to be high max health, and they also can wear these strength one-handers. So Prot Warrior, Prot Paladin this is probably going to represent a large percentage of their damage, especially in an AoE scenario. But any one-handed strength user, so even Death Knights or whatever, are going to be happy using this, even if they're not tank specs. Probably. Although, again, for those specs, 25 corruption, that might not be the best bang for their buck that they can get for 25 corruption. So, all right, next item, Skshul Vaz. This is a 2-handed strength axe. You gain obsidian skin, increasing your armor by 5%. Every 100% of your max health lost, so every time you've taken damage equal to your total health, you explode with obsidian destruction, dealing shadow damage equal to 1,000% of your armor to all enemies within 20 yards. So any 2-handed strength user will probably get some utility out of this, but Blood Death Knight in particular can do insane damage with this. Blood Death Knight takes a lot of damage and then heals it back up, so they're going to cycle through 100% of their max health pretty frequently. They have a lot of armor because they're plate users, and this is I've seen screenshots already of Details damage meters where Obsidian Destruction was Blood Death Knight's highest damage by far. So first of all, I'm expecting this gets nerfed before it makes it to live, but if it doesn't, it's going to represent a huge amount of damage for Blood Death Knights in Mythic Plus in particular, because again, this is not split damage. This is just damage done to everything nearby. I don't think this will make it to live, though, as is. All right, next one, Anzig Vra. This is a 2-handed Agi staff, so Survival Hunters, Feral Druids. I think there's another couple specs that can use this. Brewmaster Monks, right? Your auto attacks bite into the target's soul, dealing 2% of your health in damage and healing you for that amount. So this one is interesting, depending on your auto speed. I mean, 2% of your health in damage, it's a reasonable amount of damage and it's on all of your auto attacks. However, usually people that use two-handed staffs aren't autoing all that often. So you'd be seeing this happening. Yeah, I don't know how much DPS this is going to represent yet. This seems like it'll be particularly annoying to play against in PvP in particular, because the healing on that as well is going to be a lot of utility also. But yeah, I mean, all of these weapons look pretty powerful. This one certainly does too. I think nothing looks as broken as this Blood Death Knight one here. Skashul Vaz. Wow, that is hard to pronounce. All right, next item, Whispering Eldritch Bow. So this is a hunter bow. Your auto shots reduce the remaining cooldown of a random hunter ability by 1.0 seconds. This is an interesting one. If you only have like True Shot on cooldown and every auto shot you spend is reducing the cooldown of either like True Shot or Aim Shot or whatever by a second, this ability is looking pretty strong. However, if you use Feign Death or Aspect of the Turtle or Aspect of the Cheetah or whatever, then suddenly your auto shots are sometimes reducing those cooldowns instead. So this is going to heavily incentivize hunters to avoid putting anything on cooldown that isn't one of their DPS buttons, because they don't want their auto shots to be randomly reducing those things instead of their DPS buttons. It'll be a DPS loss to do that, basically, which is a shame. That it might be interesting to play with, but I imagine hunters are not going to be happy about that incentive. All right, the next item, Markawa the Mind Piercer. This is a one-handed intellect axe. So we're looking at Elemental Shaman, Restoration Shaman, Mistweaver Monk, and Holy Paladin. Your mind's true potential is unlocked, causing your spells to grant you flashes of insight. Gain between 1 and 8% intellect at all times. So we're looking at an average value here of 4.5% intellect on this equip. Primary stat, not always a huge scaler, depending on which of these specs you're playing. But this is a lot of intellect to have on an equip here. Again, this, it may not be competitive with other sources of 25 corruption, right? This may not be as good as spending a 25 corruption budget on 5 pieces of 2% crit damage. But still, this looks like a pretty hefty amount of intellect. All right, and the final item here, the Eye Stalk of Il'gynoth. This is a wand, an int wand. I think all wands are int wands. Anyway, it says your spells and abilities have a chance to show you the ineffable truth, increasing the rate your cooldowns recover by 20% for 12 seconds. Again, this is about 1 proc per minute. So this ends up being, you have 20% cooldown reduction for 12 seconds, an average of 12 seconds every 1 minute, so an average of 20% of every minute. So you're looking at an average of 4% cooldown recovery by equipping this Eye Stalk of Il'gynoth, like averaged out over time, which is a pretty substantial amount of cooldown recovery. That we're looking at not quite Convergence of Fate levels of cooldown reduction, but this seems like it's going to be quite nice. The spec that kind of jumps to most people's minds when they see this is Fire Mage, because Fire Mage plays so well with things like Hyperthread Wrist Wraps and Lucid Dreams, which are cooldown recovery options. And I'm sure that this is going to be a solid DPS increase for those specs. Again, the main thing is just whether or not this is worth the 25 corruption. Now, let's talk about, you may have heard me say 2% crit damage costs 5 corruption. That's because we have also got a crit damage nerf here. That has been nerfed from 5% to 2% for the tier 1, which costs 5 corruption. And that was by far the most powerful corruption affix. It still seems like 2% is crit damage for tier 1 is going to be the most efficient way to get DPS for your corruption. Again, if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, go watch my earlier video on corrupted items. This seems like 5 corruption for 2% crit damage. Seems like it's still going to be the best way to get access to damage for your corruption budget. But some of these are probably going to be competitive, these weapons. 25 is so much corruption, right? It's so much corruption. I'm not sure about the medium ones of these. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it, especially once you get access to a bunch of these tier 1 corrupted items. But until then, I think these are going to be pretty solid. And if these are just high item level weapons and they're the only high item level weapon you've got for many specs, that's also going to be worth using. One final thing that's on this article that's worth mentioning is that the Legendary Cloak now has some corruption resistance, 5 at rank 1, and it'll scale up as you increase, theoretically, the rank of that cloak. So that's going to mean that your corruption budget might effectively be more like 60 or 59 or whatever, and you'll still stay below that 40 corruption breakpoint where you start getting things chasing you, which I think is going to be what you'll probably want to avoid in Mythic rating. So, anyways, that's been this update. You can check out the full Wowhead article with all this information in the description of the video. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.